while Chris and while Chris is doing that, I'm just going to offer some introductory remarks. Chris and I work in the Educator Workforce and Development Center at MDE, which is really focused on supporting districts, families, communities, schools, teachers, and especially students with an educator workforce addressing shortage areas, providing more pathways into education for people who traditional pathways don't work with. And we really see in Tennessee, in Minnesota, that we really try to ground our work in 10 commitments to equity at the Department of Ed. And we tend to, in the Educator Workforce and Development Center, call out commitment number 8, because number 8 is about developing the people that you have, focusing on principals and teachers, and about keeping your people working in an inclusive work environment. And so we really try to think about our work, and as a result, this work related to this grant that we're going to share with you today, about valuing people and demonstrating our commitment to equity by valuing people. In the Educator Workforce and Development Center, we have a theory of action, or a vision, I guess I should say, that every student benefits from a diverse, qualified, thriving educator workforce. And we really sort of organize our work in sort of 4 buckets and have a 4-piece theory of action based on those 4 buckets. We really try to think about a teacher's full journey throughout their lifetime in education, from being inspired and exploring education as a career option to engaging in a pathway into the profession. So becoming a teacher, growing into the profession, so induction and mentoring, and then as they're an accomplished teacher, thriving. And we really believe that if we can support all 4 of those areas in a teacher's journey, then we will achieve that vision that I shared with you. And today, Chris and Beth are going to share with you about an exciting grant opportunity that we have out there in the space of helping teachers grow, so sort of that grow part of the teacher journey. But I would argue it touches others, but especially you can see where it fits in grow, because this grant opportunity is all about mentoring, induction, and retaining teachers. So it's really the part of our theory of action that if we support success in teachers' early years, then every student benefits from a diverse, qualified, thriving educator workforce. So thanks for sticking with me while I share a little bit about the Workforce Center and about our work and about how this grant and your work relates to this work. So I hope that you see your work in this shared work that we all engage in. So I'm going to pass it to Chris, and he's going to talk a little bit about the more about the grant itself. Oh no, I'm doing this slide, aren't I?
Go for it.
We actually are really well rehearsed. It's just different when you get here and it's all spread out on 16 screens. Just a word about questions. We at MDE really we strive to run fair, transparent, competitive grant processes that don't favor any one person or one entity over another. And part of that, important to run a fair and transparent grant process, is that everyone has the same information. So we do, for all of our grants, we publish a frequently asked question so that everybody gets all the information at the same time. But just today, during the presentation, what I would ask you to do is to put your questions in the chat so that we have a record of your questions and they can appear in the FAQ. I'm just going to be upfront with you. Some questions we may not be able to answer today, because as I said, we want to ensure all applicants or potential applicants have the same information at the same time. So there may be questions that we have to say that question will be answered in the FAQ, and you'll have to wait until the first version of the FAQ comes out. We can answer questions that are already public knowledge, that are in the instructions or in the grant application or in the grant rubric. So information that's out there, we can reiterate, we can to some extent clarify, but we may not be able to answer all questions in the spirit of maintaining a fair and transparent competition. If you have questions today, as I said, put them in the chat. If you think of questions afterwards, then you can submit those to Chris, and you see his email address there. If you could submit those by November 5th, then that will give us time to finalize the final frequently asked questions and have it posted by November 16th. If we receive a lot of questions on the front end, we often will put out multiple versions of an FAQ so that the information is coming before November 16th. But that's just something that we monitor and we look at it on a grant by grant basis. So thanks for putting your questions in the chat, and thanks for any follow-up questions emailing to Chris. And thanks once again for understanding our need to maintain a transparent and fair process. And so there may be questions that we don't answer. Now I'm going to hand it to the man of the hour.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
We're men of the hour, Greg. It's not just me. Here's what we're going to talk about today a little bit. We're going to overview the grant, talk about the participants that are eligible, some key dates. I think that'll be helpful. Sample activities, grant priorities, and grant reporting. A lot of that's going to be from statute, and so it may be something that you already know, I've already heard. And then Beth's going to talk a little about grant reporting and grant submission and review process. And then we'll finish out. So again, thanks for being here. This grant came over from Pelsby this year. So this is Greg and I's first time with this grant. Be patient with us. We've got a lot of humility about making the right steps and making sure it works for you. So if we have a misstep here or there, it'll happen. So the funding amounts for this year, for FY26, for fiscal year 26, is about $3,395,000. $3,395,000, and the grant period is going to be 24 months for those who are awarded this grant. The majority of that funding is really focused on supporting the teachers of color and American Indian teachers. When you submit your application, we may offer amounts that are different from your request in terms of those that are awarded. And Greg, I'm going to have you speak just to this last point in terms of most grants.
Okay. And I know this is always something that someone is interested in, so we want to be sure that we're really clear here. We often have potential applicants who want, give me a dollar figure. I need a dollar figure. I need to know how much my application is going to be. So we have looked at previous grants and looked at our previous experience working with grantees in this space. And typically a grant is going to be about $250,000 for the 2 years, for both of the years of the 2 years, not for each year. So we offer that as kind of a guidepost for potential grantees who want, like, how much should I be thinking about in my budget? However, it is not a firm maximum grant request. So we do expect to receive grant requests that are over $250,000. And of course, we would expect that we would receive ones that are well under $250,000. Because one of the natures of this grant is we have several large entities that have received grants in the past and several really small grant requests that have been funded. So 250 is just sort of a number to think about, but not necessarily a hard cap. So just remember that. And just know that as we review them, we will also be sort of thinking about that when we're reviewing budgets and thinking about the criteria with which we review budgets is the request reasonable? So are the costs and the items and the overall budget reasonable and necessary? So that $250,000, again, is just something to think about, not a hard cap for your application. No applications will be discarded if they are over $250,000, or not discarded, but ineligible.
Thanks for clarifying, Greg. Okay, so this grant is really designed to help develop, sustain, or expand your mentorship program. First focus, it's for teachers new to the profession, especially teachers of color and teachers who are American Indian. Certainly teachers in license shortage areas, and then teachers with special needs, teaching residents, and experienced teachers in need of peer coaching. So that's really who the funds are focused on for this grant. This grant is available to school districts, groups of school districts, schools or a coalition of schools, a coalition of teachers, and we should just mention here is a really good spot to say if a coalition of teachers applies, that they should identify a fiscal host partner and name that, and there is a place in the application to do that. And then, you know what I don't see, Greg, is cooperatives, and I know that this is also...
They're technically school districts.
There we go.
Yeah, they're technically school districts.
And then new this year is higher ed institutions, nonprofit organizations, and professional organizations may apply if they are in partnership with the district, school, or a coalition. So that is sort of the added shift in the legislation as it came over to MDE. So here are the key dates. The window is open. It opened last week. The informational webinar, that's happening right now, or you're watching it soon after it's happened. The question and answer period, as we talked about, closes November 5th. And we'll publish for sure the question and answers by November 16th. So you'll want to go back to that grants competitive webpage at MDE, and that's where you will find that. This closes, the application closes 5 p.m. on December 3rd. So this grant should be open for about 6 weeks. We are hoping the award letters are sent in late January of 2026. And also the intent, our hope is that funding starts in February 2026, and then the 24 months or 2 years funded through February 2028. So those are the key dates. So here are some activities for funding. Most of this comes out of statute. Keep in mind, these are sample activities. And primary sample activities would be stipends for mentors. And again, we mentioned particularly for teachers of color or American Indian teachers. Affinity group supports, providing professional learning communities for underrepresented educators, inductions programs aligned with district mentorship programs within the first 3 years of teaching, culturally responsive professional development, really thinking about closing opportunity gaps, graduate coursework toward a first master's degree or an additional license for teachers of color and American Indian teachers, and financial incentives for teachers of color and teachers who are American Indian who work in the school or district. So those are sort of sample activities for funding. Greg, anything you might mention?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Not right now.
Sounds good.
I reserve the right, though.
All right. Here are some of the expectations, or just thinking about like what is good practice in supporting this grant. One is just sort of thinking about allowing staff participation, participation in like within your network, like listening to the voices who are there in terms of being teachers, instructional leaders, administrators, the community, those who really can provide thought to this effort. Think about assessing skills for both beginning and mentor teachers, and provide in-service as necessary. Provide leadership to the effort. We know in our pilot that one of the first lessons that really jumped out is like we need leadership to be at the sort of the crux of making things happen for mentors and teachers and induction leaders. Cooperate with higher education institutions or teacher educators. Provide facilities. Here's one: sharing findings, materials, and techniques with other school districts. What we're learning in past TMRG participants is that they've been really good and really successful at thinking about learning from each other. And then finally, the bottom line is to retain teachers of color and teachers who are American Indian. Here are some program expectations. Again, from statute, a charter school or district that received this grant must negotiate additional retention strategies or protection from unrequested leaves of absence in the beginning years of employment for teachers who are of color or who are American Indian. Grant applicants must seek additional funding and assistance from sources such as school districts, post-secondary institutions, foundations, and the private sector. Really just thinking about this is not necessarily the primary source of your work in terms of moving forward. And finally, funded programs participate in activities that support the program. So some monitoring and reporting. Here's what we're asking, and really it's what's been asked from statute. Per statute, by September 30th of each year after receiving a grant, recipients must submit a report to the Department of Education that just describes the mentoring and induction activities and assesses the impact of these programs. So that would really break down into a report on September 2026, September 2027, and then a final report on February 2028, just to be clear. Okay, I'm going to stop. Beth, before we get to you, Greg, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'll jump back in when we, if we have questions and when we pause for questions. Thanks, Chris. Great job.
Yeah, okay. Beth, take it away.
Sounds good, thanks. All right, so I'm going to cover the application components, deadline, and submission instructions. And I just posted the link to the grant webpage in the chat, which I imagine you all had, but they're now for quick access. I see many familiar names in the participant list, but know that some of you may have not applied for an MDE grant before. So this is kind of our general process of what that application submission looks like, and then the steps that follow a submission. So each of your applications is going to consist of these 8 components. There's an executive summary, statement of need, capacity of applicant agency, a diversity, equity, and inclusion section, partnerships and community outreach, work plan with SMART goals, an evaluation plan, and then of course an Excel budget. So you're going to complete narrative components for all of those. And then when it is time to submit, when the deadline is December 3rd at 5 p.m., you are going to send an email, and it's going to have the application narrative and cover sheet and assurances as one document. And then you're going to have your budget document as well. So you'll email that in, and then you will get an email confirmation, let's say within 2 business days for sure, letting you know that we have received that information. So you will hear back from us confirming that we received it. And I just will reiterate that when you submit that cover sheet, assurances, and application narrative field, make sure that you do include those assurances. That's something that sometimes new applicants to us leave out, and then I would come back to you and ask for it. So make sure that you are including those assurances when you submit your application materials. And then of course, we're not going to be able to consider late applications. The deadline is at 5 p.m. on December 3rd. I'm seeing there's a difference on the due date. Let me refer to the web page. It should be, I'm gonna executive decision and say it's 5 p.m. So 5 p.m. We'll make sure that the web page says that as well, 5 p.m. Next slide, please.
Well, I think both slides say 5 p.m. I'm not sure
Okay.
if you might have inadvertently said 3 p.m., but both the slides say 5 p.m.
Well, then I'm glad that that's the executive decision I went with. Grace, can you bring me to the next slide? Perfect. So what happens after you've submitted your application? We'll go through a screening process. So first ensuring that we've received the application by the due date, and that you're an eligible entity to apply. So we're going to, review what kind of organization you are, make sure that if you are one of those organizations that needs to apply with a fiscal host, that you've done so, all of those pieces. So ensure that you're eligible. And then we're going to review your application just to make sure that it's complete. So has the cover sheet been filled out? Did you include the assurances? Do we have the narrative? And then a budget document. Once we have that complete application, then we will have a peer review process in which each application will be evaluated by multiple reviewers using a common rubric. And that rubric is posted on our webpage, so you have that information, you know that what your application is going to be scored against. And it's our standard practice to take the averages of those scores, put them together, and then award out funding based on that ranking. Next slide, one back. Perfect. So we'll do that review of outcomes. So as I said, the standard practice, we typically are going from the highest scoring application down until we run out of funds. And then, however, there's always negotiations that may happen as Chris and the team review the applications. There may be some pieces where this is a great overall project. This part isn't eligible, or we can't do this part, so we're going to take this out. Rework your budget, send us an update, and then we go from there. Once we have all those decisions made, though, we will do a pre-award risk assessment for all of our grantees. And so that is a standard practice that all state grants have to go through. And then we would complete an OGAN, which is an official grant award notification, and that is essentially your grant contract. Once that OGAN is executed, that is when your grant can officially begin. So keep in mind that you may be notified that you've been awarded in January, but you must wait until that OGAN is executed before you can actually begin work. And we'll of course be in communication with you the whole time, letting you know exactly when you are able to start work there. And I will pass it back to Chris and Craig.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, just a couple of resources to consider as you move forward in this adventure of submitting a grant. So the first resource is just the Minnesota Induction Mentoring Framework, something that was put together by a group of partners probably about 2.5 years back, and it has some really great guidance on thinking about mentoring and induction. The second resource, Planning and Implementation Guidance for Mentoring and Induction Programs document, comes out of our work in a pilot with induction mentoring districts and charters statewide about a couple of years ago, and just some of the lessons that we learned. The third resource is sort of a seminal resource, Building a More Ethnographically Diverse Teaching Force by Travis Bristol and Conrad Gist, really thinking about in support specifically of teachers of color. And finally, a really great piece of a report, Disconnection at Work, Racial Isolation, Teachers' Job Experiences, and Teacher Turnover. So those are some resources, and we're going to sort of shift here to some questions. I'm going to start with the last question and then hand it over to Greg. Well, the second to the last question now. Will this presentation slide be shared with us later so we can access to those resources? Right after this session today with you, I'm going to send all of you that have registered this PowerPoint as well as this recording. So you will have access to that.
And it'll be posted as well.
It'll be posted as well.
In the grants materials.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to scroll back up here. The first question, will there be information shared on the impact of previous teacher mentorship and retention grantees? The answer is you can go to the Pelsby website. We've put the link in here, and there are some links to the past 2 legislative reports that sort of summarize, capture what the grantees had to say and sort of summarize the programming. And again, in 2026, we will continue with that process.
I think we're okay answering many of these other questions because they're matters of statute and matters of our instructions. So they're out there as public knowledge, but we will also include them in the FAQ. Bet, are you okay with us answering these questions as you look at these?
Yeah, as long as you're referring to statute and instructions, it's all
Okay.
good.
All right. So we answered the question about previous impact or information on impact of previous grants. So be sure you take a look at the link further down. We addressed the timeline. Someone asked about, I'm confused by must negotiate additional retention strategies or protection from unrequested leaves of absence. What is an unrequested leave of absence? You probably could think of that as someone being surplused or laid off. We know that many times our teachers of color, American Indian teachers, are the teachers with the least amount of seniority. And so historically, they have been more impacted when a budget deficit is experienced and teachers have to be laid off or surplused or pink slipped. So that would be an unrequested leave of absence. So unrequested leave of absence is the language in statute. And other common ways to refer to that would be layoffs, surplusing would be probably more our education equivalents. Chris addressed the slides that they would be shared after the fact along with a recording, both with participants and then with on the website. So the general public will also have access to this information, this conversation, not the general public, but well, the general public, but people who are interested in the grant. Probably won't have a lot of high school students surfing around looking at our grant materials. Lavin's question, does this requirement apply to service cooperatives? I believe that it would, because I think we would bring service cooperatives under the eligibility of being a district. And so I think that could look a lot of different ways, but I know many service cooperatives do employ teachers for some of their programs and some do not. So I would say probably a service cooperative that did employ teachers would probably want to articulate. So the application, if you've looked at the application, really just asks like, what will this look like? And so if we had an entity that's coming in as a school district that does not employ licensed classroom teachers, I would think that in their application, they would articulate, we do not have any individuals or employees that this would apply to. So I think that would be the response. But I think it would need to be addressed or spoken to in the application, because a service cooperative, since they're not explicitly named separately as an eligible entity, we would bring them in as a school district, and this requirement applies to school districts. Victoria, I'm not sure, can you add those links to the chat? I'm not sure what links you're referring to, so if you want to put any additional chat to kind of be more specific. It is said that one of the allowable expenses is graduate coursework towards first master's degree or additional licensure. Does this include use of funds for any approved alternative preparation program that also offers additional licensure but cannot offer a master's degree? When I read the statute, it addresses master's degree or additional licensure. So I think it could be master's degree, additional licensure, or both master's degree and additional licensure. So I think that those funds could be used for an approved, Pellsby approved alternative preparation program where they're getting a license, but maybe not a master's degree. I see one person on the screen, Lavin, and she just kind of had a puzzled look on her face. Lavin, can you give me a thumbs up if what I said made any sense at all?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So if it's initial licensure in an alternative prep program, it would not be applicable.
No, this specifically says an additional license.
Okay, thank you.
And keep in mind, these grants are meant to support like a teacher with a license. Now, could be tier 1, could be tier 2, could be tier 3, could be tier 4. So I think we would consider in this case, initial licensure could be a tier 1 license. Statute does not say it has to be a tier 3 license, just that they have a license. So I guess I'm kind of undoing what I just said.
Right. So, I mean, a tier 1 teacher enrolls in an alternative prep program, completes that, moves to be a tier 3 teacher, but it's still their first tier 3 license.
Yes.
So
we
it
would see that funds could be used to support that
Okay, thank you.
if they're a classroom teacher.
Thank you.
We are not requiring letters of support and recommendation. Right, Chris?
That's right.
Okay. In the case of an institute of higher ed, in the case of a professional organization, which one am I missing? The 3 that have to partner with other eligible applicants, I think the application would need to name the partners. A letter of support or a letter of commitment would not be, would not hurt an application, but it is not necessarily required in the application materials. I think Pelsby, for Jean, on the Pelsby link that Greg shared, it says the application is due February 6th. I think Pelsby just needs to update their website and take that off. In the application, it says cooperative units. We're considering them eligible as districts, though, per the statute. All right, hold on. Teachers in licensure shortage areas, we would probably be looking to the supply and demand report, which I'm going to be really frank with you, probably lists just about every teacher licensure area. So on the technical side, I think it's at this point with the teacher shortage that we have sort of moot. And I think if we were to put our heads together and think of teacher licensure shortage areas, special education, STEM, elementary ed would be ones that come to mind. English learner supports. But we would look to the supply and demand report primarily. Add links for the planning and resources and guides. Are these over here?
Yeah. Those are coming in the next hour.
Okay. So Chris will send those in the follow-up email, Victoria. And then Laura, what did you want to say? I have to admit, I kind of stumbled around on the additional licensure.
Thank you, Greg. Well, in terms of Pelsby vernacular, additional licensure is something very specific for someone that has a tier 3 or tier 4 license, and they can add an additional license. A tier 1, you can't add an additional license. If you're a tier 1 teacher candidate, you're not enrolled in a program, but you have an initial license. A tier 2 teacher, you're enrolled in a teacher prep program, either alternative or higher ed, or you have a master's in the content, and that's your tier 2 license. I'm a little confused by how you were answering Lane's question about using the terminology initial and additional, because both Lane, I'm sure, and myself, we run programs where we have folks enrolled, or I'll just say enrolled in our program, either alt prep or higher ed, seeking their first tier 2 license. They are a tier 2 licensed teacher of record, and they're seeking their first license, and it's going to be a tier 3. It's not an additional license, though. It's their first initial.
So
Does
maybe,
that make sense?
maybe for this one, let's put a stop.
Yes, agree.
Let Chris and I confer with Pelsby how they would interpret this, and then offer a definitive and clear response in the FAQ.
I agree. That's smart. Thank
Chris,
you.
when you send out the final, maybe just reiterate in terms of this question, so maybe copy the question, and just to reiterate this question for anybody who might have dropped off early or anything like that, maybe include this question and say, after some conversation, MDE will confer with Pelsby around this question, and the FAQ will offer the final definitive response across the agencies. So
That's great. And so just for the record, I think what our question is for enrolled tier 2 teachers in alt prep or higher ed, can this money be used to support them as they are working towards their full tier 3 license, which is their first initial license?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
I understand the tiered licensure system. Maybe I don't understand the difference between what Pelsby considers an initial license versus, let's say, maybe an emergency license or not an initial license. So maybe I need some clarification there. So apologies. As Chris and I did go through and say, what do we think are going to be questions? What do we think are going to be? This one was not one that we identified as we need to think this one through prior to the webinar and publishing the instructions. So we will get you an answer to that one. And then there's some thank yous and some web links, but we will copy this information into the FAQ and offer a definitive answer. Chris will also send a follow-up email with links to the resources, a reiteration about the question that we'll confer with Pelsby on, and the slide deck.
Sounds good.
So I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to pass it back to Chris for closure.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Thanks for tackling the questions. Thank you for your questions. Appreciate you all. Email me. It's in the PowerPoint, chris.ramadan.state. With any of your questions, Greg and I and Bet will sit down. We'll make sure that we get your questions answered. Send them before November 5th, and we'll post them on the 16th. Take care, y'all.
Sorry.